Hi, my name is Matthew Thomas, and I'm a software developer for Kforce. And recently, we've conducted a series of interviews concerning WPF and MVVM architecture. And so, what I'd like to do today is go over that interview from a technical perspective and showcase what is the application that we're asking people to build, as well as how to actually build it. And along the way, some things that we're looking for. In terms of knowledge from the candidate, and just kind of in general background altogether. So let's begin. So what we're doing here is we're asking our candidates to build a very simple WPF application from scratch that searches for presidents who are named whatever the user types in. So in this case here, if I'm looking for presidents who are named John, then when I click the search button here, we'll find presidents not only whose first names are John, but whose last name matches the search criteria as well. Additionally, we're looking for people to disable the button when there's two or less characters in the search box here, and as soon as we type in that third character, then that button lights up. So let's begin on building that application. Now, when we start the application, we're going to start pretty much with bare bones here. Not much more than a file new application. We do give them the definition of a president here, so not only a first name and last name and the date they took and left office, and some other properties as well. But also a repository to get all of the presidents. And then because I find that routed command and routed UI command are a little difficult to work with in some settings, we're going to give them implementation of Delegate Command, which takes a delegate for executing and then a predicate for determining whether or not the command is capable of executing. So let's start off here with the main window here. I'm going to bring this over to the side just a little bit here so we can kind of see what it is that we're doing. Now, one of the things that kind of is a tell right away here is whether the candidate pulls out this toolbox and starts dragging tools from the toolbox onto the canvas, or whether the candidate edits the code directly in XAML here. Your good candidates are going to be people that jump in directly to the XAML here. So let's look at this layout for a second, and basically what it is, it's a 3-column application here. So in this first column here, we've got our text box and text block and our text box. And then we've got, in the second column here, our button, and then in the third column we've got our data grid. So let's go ahead and build that. So in the XAML here, you'll notice we do not have a root level object, so let's go ahead and put that in. This is just a grid, and we're going to give it 3 columns, but we start out by giving it grid.column definitions and column definition whose width is star, and same thing for the other 2 columns. So let's go ahead and fill in this first column here, the the text block and the text box, and that's in a stack panel. Block text equals name, and then text box is text is equal to a binding search. Right. Now, one thing to note here is that we are looking for a text block and not a label. The difference is that a label is intended to be bound to something that's going to have a little bit more complex content in it. That's why they give it the content property as opposed to a text property. Now you can put a string of text in there and it will render, but because we're not binding to, say, a complex object on the view model and having the content rendered as a data template, a text box is appropriate for this setting here. So the next thing that we'll need is a button whose content equals search. Now this button here, it is a string here and there is content here, and it's because we could put in a label or a rectangle or an image or something a little bit more complex than a string, but in this case here, this is the appropriate property here for this. Now you'll notice in our preview here that the button showed up in the first column, and that's not exactly what we want. We want it over here in the middle column here. So we'll do that by using the grids attached property, and these columns here and rows in a grid are ordered, are zero ordering. So this is column 0, column 1, and column 2. So this guy is going to go in grid.column equals 1. Now, that's still not good enough here because you see this guy here is expanded to take the entire width and height of this cell, and this guy here is really just kind of bare bones on the height and width here. So we'll change that by altering his horizontal and vertical alignment from stretch to their appropriate values. So let's change that horizontal alignment first from stretch to center, and then we'll change his vertical alignment from stretch to top. And then if you look at the example that we've given here, you'll see there's a little bit of space between the S and the border over here, and a little bit of space from the H and the border here. And if we click off of that and maybe zoom in a little bit on this example here, you'll see that the S bumps right up to the border, and the same thing for the H. And we can fix that by adjusting the padding on this button here. And so we'll give it a padding of 5 all the way around. Now, what I'd really like to see a candidate explain to me here is that if I said 5, 5, 5, 5, that's the equivalent of just saying 5 altogether, but what does each of these 5s mean? And the answer that we're looking for here is that the first one corresponds to the left padding, the second one corresponds to the top padding, the next one corresponds to the right padding, and the last one corresponds to the bottom here. So starting in a clockwise motion, we just start here at the left-hand side. So the next thing that we need to do is put in a data grid. The data grid. And we'll make that a self-closing tag. Now, again, the default here for grids is row 0, column 0, and the last child gets the highest order Z index. So we're going to move this guy over to the third column here, or grid.column, whose index is 2. And that'll put us there. Now, you'll notice in our example here that our content, or our elements, don't bump right up to the border of the window here. And that's because at the outermost grid, we've put a margin of 5. And so now in our preview here, you'll see, we can scroll down just a little bit here, how the data grid whose horizontal and vertical alignment are set to stretch here don't bump all the way out to the border of the window here. So that pretty much completes the front-end portion of the application. Let's go ahead and move along to the view model. So here we're going to add a class called main window view model. And we really haven't given the candidate anything, and that's intentional because what we're looking to see is how much base MVVM architecture knowledge the candidate has. So let's make this a public class that it implements iNotify property changed. And we'll import system.component model. And then we'll implement this interface. Now, after we've implemented this interface, we need a delegate to help us invoke the event. So let's just make that a private method on property changed. And we're going to need a string property name. And then we'll do a check to make sure that the delegate is not null. The case where delegate would be null is if it hasn't been wired up to any consumers. Purely from a technical standpoint, this delegate, if it's connected to a view if it serves as a view model, it should always be should always have an instance behind it. But just kind of as good eventing practices in your method that invokes the event here, you should be checking to make sure that event's not null. So let's go ahead and do that. And let's say if property changed does not equal null. Get my curly brackets all out of whack here, so let's bring that back. Then we're just going to raise the event, so property changed, and we're going to send this as the sender, and we're going to make a new property changed event bars, and the name of the property is going to be property name. Now, in the newer versions of the .NET, there's a new attribute that actually makes this allows us to change this to an optional parameter, and so we do that by asking for a null or just a default of null here, and then using the caller member name attribute. And when this function is invoked from either another method or a property, then the name of the property or the name of the method will get injected as a value into this argument here. So we, as developers, don't have to put some kind of magical string in there to do that. So something new in the .NET framework, and if you know it, excellent. And if you don't, that's okay too, because it's still relatively new and not widespread and known. So let's go ahead and put that first property in here. I think we called it search criteria. So let's make it a public string search criteria. Now let's put that with a capital S. Technically speaking, a lowercase s and a capital S are the same thing. I like to use the .NET types as opposed to the language types, but that's just me. So if we make this just a normal get setter, then whenever a new incoming value is set, nobody knows about it because we didn't raise the event. So in order to overcome that, we need to make a private member backing variable, string search criteria, and then when we get it, we're going to return search criteria, and then when we set it, we're going to set search criteria equal to the incoming value, and then we're also going to raise our event, so on property changed. Let's go ahead and reformat that so it looks a little better there. And now, whenever the incoming value is set from either the UI or from internal to the application here, we're going to go ahead and raise that on-property change notification so any UI consumers or anybody who's listening knows about it. So now we need to wire up our buttons event. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's make public delegate command execute search. Let's bring in the namespace for that. And we did say that delegate command was one of the things that we gave our candidates here. And this is highly modeled off the Prism library. So when this command changes here, or when it's time to requery the command, there's a method that exists on the delegate command called raise execute change, or raise can execute change. But first, we need to make the delegates for this. So let's make a private void execute search execute object and because delegate command was an action of object, that's of course a delegate who accepts a single argument of type object and returns a void, and a predicate is a delegate who accepts an object as a parameter but returns a type boolean. So let's go ahead and create that first one, and then let's make the second one with a can execute. So boolean execute search can execute object param, and for right just this second here we're just going to return true so that our compiler is satisfied. So let's go ahead and set this guy up in the constructor. So let's make a default constructor. So main window view model. And let's create it. So execute search equals new delegate command. We'll pass in our action to execute, which is execute search execute, and the predicate for our can execute, which is this guy here. So it's just execute search can execute. So now we said earlier that this button should only light up whenever we have 3 characters or more present in our search criteria here. So let's modify this. Let's modify this function here so that satisfies those conditions. So this is going to be true when string.isNull or white space for search criteria equals false, and search criteria.length is greater than or equal to 3. Now, the reason why we do a null or white space condition first here is because whenever this first executes, search criteria is actually null. So if we were to ask for a length condition, our application would throw a null reference exception and crash. So we don't want that. So we do that null check first here, and because the double and is a short-circuiting operator, the second half of this condition never executes if this first half returns false. So let's. The other thing is that we need to know when to re-trigger this method, and that's anytime the search criteria changes. So we just say execute search dot raise can execute changed, and that will tell the delegate command internally. If we go to definition on this here, just to raise that event and then force this method to re-execute. So one thing that we didn't do over here on the main window is that, well, two things actually here. The first thing is that this setter is only going to execute whenever the text box triggers a set on its text value. Now, by default, the text box will do that whenever it loses focus, but we need to do that whenever the keys change here. So if we came back and said JOHN, right, on that third keystroke here, that's when it lights up. It doesn't light up whenever I click outside of the box here. So we'll modify our binding from the default binding for TextBox is lost focus, but we need to update that whenever the property changes. So we'll just change that there. The other thing is that the button at this point in time doesn't have a command wired to it, so we need to give it a command with a capital C there to be binding execute search. So now the last thing that we need to do is come in and build the repository here, or build the property that shows our list of presidents that match our search criteria. So let's come over here and do that. And what we'll do is we will make a public observable SERVABLE collection of object called search results. Now, of course, this exists in the system collections object model namespace. And a normal get set is fine for this here because we're not going to modify the instance of the collection at runtime here. We're just going to modify the elements of the collection at runtime. So we need to instantiate it, so we have a reference to work with. So search results equals new observable collection of object. And now whenever we click that button and do our search here, we want to look for presidents whose either first or last name matches that search criteria. And we'd like it to be case insensitive and then order by last name and then by first name. So if we come over here to that presidents repository here, we see that we get an iQueryable of all presidents. So let's go ahead and add that in. So our matching presidents equals president repository, and we need to import that using statement using model dot get all presidents. Now two options are available here. You could either use the SQL syntax to execute your link query, or you could use the lambda syntax. I preferably like the lambda syntax, so we're going to go with that. So we'll use a .where clause, and we're going to ask for P for our president and P dot first name, and because this is a case insensitive, we'll normalize it to upper. Dot contains search criteria to upper, or P dot last name dot to upper contains search criteria dot to upper. And so that satisfies our search for presidents, but of course we need just the first name and just the last name and not the whole president object. So we'll project that into a new object by using our dot select. But before we do that, we need to order them. So we'll do a dot order by P dot last name. And then when we do our ordering in link, if we chose the order by that would actually reorder for our second set of ordering. That would reorder the entire collection by the new delegate. In this case, we want to preserve the ordering that was done in the first order by. So here we'll use a dot then by p dot first p dot first name. And so now then we can project it into just the first name last name object. So we'll select it into or we'll project it into a new object here, a new dynamic type that we're going to create on the fly or inline here. So we're going to pass in our president, and we're going to ask that we return a new object whose first that's got a first name property equals p dot first name, and last name property equals p dot last name. Close the curly brace, close the parens, and then what we'll do here is we'll say search criteria dot clear. Or I'm sorry, not search criteria. Search results dot clear, and then we'll add that into the search results collection. And because this is an observable collection, every time we add an item to it, it fires off that event for iNotify collection changed. So we don't have to do anything special in this view model. So we'll just say for each var president in matching presidents, and then we'll say search results dot add president. There's that. And so now we've got the link query, which will execute whenever we hit our search button. So the last thing that we need to do is come back over to the view and bind that data grid to the search results property. So let's set that there. And this is just going to be the items source equals binding with a capital B search results. And then make sure that our main window's data context is bound to our main window view model. Excuse me. So we'll do that in the code behind by saying this dot data context equals new main window view model. And if we run that, we have some build errors. Do we have something? Oh, curly brace here. Oh, missing a parens there. So now if we search for John, we see excuse me, the same results that we had from our example. So John Adams, John Quincy Adams, Andrew Johnson, Lyndon Johnson, John Kennedy, and John Tyler. So I hope this was helpful for you, and if you have any comments, let me know. Thank you.